Hello, everyone. Welcome to Doing Sociology. Today, we have a very interesting session on ethnography with Gayathri Sreedharan. Gayathri is an ethnographer, applied anthropologist, and a writer. She did her BA in economics from Fergusson College, a master's diploma in broadcast journalism from Asian College of Journalism, and an MA in anthropology from University of Chicago. Previously, she was the ethnographic lead at Vihara Innovation Network. But in February 2020, Gayathri has taken a leap forward and she has founded Anthropologiste, a research and communications agency that looks to leverage multidisciplinary study and insights to build more participatory research models and comprehensive and sustainable models of development that prioritize individuals and community-owned solutions. Welcome, Gayathri, to our blog, Doing Sociology. We are very, very happy to have you here, and thank you for doing this. We open the floor to your presentation, and we'll get back with some questions once you're done. So it's all yours.
Okay. Thank you so much, Doing Sociology team, for having me. I feel like I've arrived. I just feel like I've arrived being interviewed by you. For whoever is listening and watching this session, like Ritu said, she kind of summed up my life. I live in Delhi, and I've been practicing ethnography for the last 7 years. And the presentation I'm going to make to you now is kind of it's a combination of things that I have learned in the field and in the classroom, as things should be. So here we go. So this is an introduction to ethnographic research methods, kind of a 101, and what's more important right now in times of COVID is understanding how to adapt these methods for remote and digital research. So this picture is a picture from the time I spent at the India-Myanmar border doing my own ethnographic research for my MA thesis. I've come to learn that ethnography is a lot about writing. Literally, the word graphy is about study or writing. It means writing. And it's also a lot like playing a detective. So I don't know if you recognize this quote on screen. When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. This is something that Sherlock tells Watson early on when he's training him in his methods. And I've come to believe that ethnographers, people who spend time in the field and then land up creating narratives around them, are very much like like real life Watsons. You know, their job is to really go at a problem, go at an issue, look at the issue from every possible angle, every possible perspective, and then write it up. So ethnography, like I said, the etymology of ethnography. Now, this is a very important distinction. The etymology of ethnography indicates that it was meant to be the writing or study of communities, peoples, races, tribes, and mostly foreign cultures. But really what has happened is since the emergence of post-colonial and liberal thought, especially since the Second World War, and once the British Empire started, moved away from India, moved away from other parts of South Asia, there was the Belgian Empire, French Empire started receding. There was a greater understanding within the social science community that communities, with migration, they don't look and feel the same anymore. There are many multi-textured hues. The point being that you can't base a community on the basis of race or exotic, features or any such determinants anymore. It's not fair, and it's just completely off base. And so they started exploring social scientists who use ethnography as a method started exploring ethnography as determined by such factors as age, geography or location, socioeconomic class, because we still haven't, unfortunately, dismissed those boundaries yet, those inequalities yet. Another really interesting and it can be a very democratic approach is consumer patterns. Looking at something just from the perspective of who is buying that car, what is the community of people who are buying a particular brand of potato chips or a particular brand of cola. In a nutshell, ethnography is today the study of a common experience of an event, a phenomenon, an action, or you can say an activity. It's about studying the world from the perspective of its social relations. So, for example, what are my social relations with Deepali or Ritu? What are my social relations with a table or a chair, even that is of a particular make or of a particular brand or costs something or looks like something. It's about understanding changes in cultural phenomena, right? And most importantly, in all of this, it's about understanding your subject's interpretations of the same. So when, for example, a typical study would be that of not a typical ethnographic study. I'm just taking an example which is really common. If you were to study man-woman relations as a social scientist, you might want to look at an external party's or maybe a child's interpretation of the parents' relationship or the in-laws' interpretation of the daughter-in-law or son-in-law's relationships, how that's changing. The point is that understanding it from a very human perspective is the key in ethnography, right? Ethnography has evolved to be multidisciplinary as a result, and it draws from a community's history and literatures. Now, when I say literatures, I don't just mean like writings by established writers. I also mean posters, online blog posts, anything that gives you an idea of what they're writing, what people are documenting. It could even be like a cartoon that is emerging from a community about a community. It draws from geographies, their politics, their biologies, and their phenomenology, like phenomenology being the study of phenomena. Ethnography is a study of social relations, cultural norms. I know this doesn't make it very easy, but it's important to sort of look at it in a holistic way. That's the driving point out here. So we also look at landscapes, spaces, geographies, rituals and practices, kinships, beliefs and value systems, and the personal experience of all of these and how they tie into each other. This is a definition from the Princeton Anthropology website, which I quite like. And so I've been using this definition. Some of the key things to note here are the hands-on, on-the-scene learning. So I'm going to be asking, asking later, is it possible to separate hands-on and on-the-scene? Must hands-on and on-the-scene always be together? And then, of course, the other thing is many kinds of personal experiences, right? So that then is something that you should keep in mind as well. What makes up a personal experience for you? If you plan to get a training in ethnography and then you intend to, instead of maybe going into academia, you want to go into market research or consumer research, or you want to go into the development sector, you will nowadays, you are likely to come across the terms focused, micro, or rapid ethnographies. A focused or a rapid ethnography is, I don't really like I somehow feel rapid ethnography is kind of like an oxymoron, but nevertheless, a focused or a rapid ethnography, unlike the typical ethnographic exercise where one just sort of, I don't know, one is expected to go into go and live with a community for a long period of time and, several weeks, months, and come up with problems there. In this case, a focused ethnography usually has an articulated problem statement right at the start of the exercise. It could be a prolonged exercise, it could be a slightly longer exercise than just a few days per se, but the ethnographer usually has a rough hypothesis or a problem solving framework in mind when performing a focused ethnography. So for example, an ethnographic exercise may look at beliefs and practices that impact access to primary health care within a given community. Just that, you just want to understand how do people's practices impact their ability to access primary health care. A focused or a micro ethnography would actually go a step further, and maybe in that you could further zero down into what are the beliefs that stop men from accessing primary sexual health care in a given community. So it's a lot more focused. It's it's men specifically. You may also want to define their age group. Having done secondary research, desk research, you may say, I want to look at men between the ages of 18 to 30 or 30 to 55 because of certain factors. And then with all of that preparation and a little bit of presupposition, you go into the field after that. And your task is kind of that leg of the research is kind of that performance is a little reduced. Let's talk about the problem with ethnography first. So if you're listening to this and you are, or you're going to be a student of sociology or anthropology, you would have or you will come across the book Writing Culture, which is a very, very important book as far as building a critique of ethnography and the way it was practiced is concerned. And it was one of those books that documented and helped precipitate a change in the way people practiced ethnography, right? In Writing Culture, James Clifford and George Marcus put together essays that argued against the kind of bland, impersonal, and unreflexive observation of culture that was going on. Sorry to say, you'll come across Branislaw Malinowski, and there isn't that much. You might observe that there isn't as much of Malinowski in that text, and you wonder why. Yes, of course, his observations are there, but there isn't really an acknowledgement of color or bias exactly. And this is something that by the mid-80s, actually much earlier, by the mid-70s, I would say, people started noticing that, that there was something problematic with the way ethnography was being practiced. Ethnographies were problematic at that time, and ethnographers couldn't call out their own biases and were bordering on insensitive, even unethical. And so we're going to come back quickly to this picture, but definitely Writing Culture, this book, the cover picture, I don't think that there could be another picture, a picture that more aptly describes the conflict that ethnography faced. So yeah, we struggle with our own biases. We struggle with the subject's bias when we practice ethnography. We struggle with the physical, intellectual challenges of the subject and the researcher. And if you haven't already come across this event, please look up on Google, look up James Cook, Hawaii, and dance. Just do plus and look it up. I mean, for one, it's like a really interesting event in history, but it's also scandalous, and it's a really important uh, point in history that historical anthropologists and historians have studied over and over. Retrospectively, they've tried to understand why what happened, and there's a lot to do with bias out there. The ethics of introducing yourself to somebody's environment, even if you have their permission, even if they say yes, 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 it's a good idea, please come over and watch us while we eat or spend time with the family. No, we don't mind, we don't object. What's going to change when you step in? You are a foreigner. You are, even if you're going from like Bhatinda to Jalandhar, right? You are still an alien factor in this environment. So, what is going to change by you just simply being there and not doing anything, apparently? There's the challenge of the public versus private persona. I mean, ethnographers will tell you that it takes a while for the people that you're observing, your subject, to drop pretenses, to drop the public persona, to drop the person that they want you to see, so that you can witness something more authentic or organic. But then there are challenges to that as well. Who are you to say that uh, the public persona, the facade that someone puts up, isn't an authentic representation of themselves? So, when does ethnography start really? And yeah, there's the problem of lack of awareness of cultural sensitivities. This is something that I've definitely experienced in the last 6, 7 years. And I've struggled with it. And I've done weeks of what I thought was solid ethnographic practice, and then realized that somebody who was hosting me or someone who I was dependent on for networking purposes um, found little things that I did irksome or annoying, and it developed into a lack of cultural understanding, both on their part and on mine. So these are problems that ethnographers face. On the other hand, the best thing about and the most powerful thing about ethnography, and when you have the ability to call out your own bias, to acknowledge your own bias, to acknowledge that even as an unbiased or a minimally biased researcher who is not emotionally attached, you can only you are still trying. When you're able to do all of that, what is beautiful about ethnography is that basically it's a practice in empathy, and that is something you will not find in other fields. That's a little judgmental, I realize, but maybe you will find, and you will find it in a lot of other fields. But I have found it in ethnography, and that's why I love it so much. It's a practice in empathetic listening more than anything else. And the key thing is, rather than conflating empathy with sympathy, right? Which is a tendency that we do. We think that we're being empathetic. We're really being sympathetic. There are elements of pity that creep into our practice, into our, say, oh, we're observing poor cobblers in Madhya Pradesh, or we're observing a tribe that doesn't have anything, right? We have to practice taking a step back and really listening and seeing much more carefully and having a thumb rule. Now, this is a literal practical tip that I can give you, that it's, speak lesser than is needed. So maybe you can come up with a thumb rule for yourself when you're practicing it. If you're observing someone and if you want to talk to them, listen and observe more than you speak. Listen, and when I say observe, in a sense, what I'm saying is listen for non-verbal cues, watch for non-verbal cues. If you're speaking, you won't be able to catch those a lot. So maybe you set yourself up just as a starting practice. Maybe you set yourself up to say, all right, I'm going to make a mental note when I'm observing that person on the road. I'm going to make a mental note of three or four important things about her or him or them before I ask a question that is probing, which is open-ended, close-ended, what have you, right? And once I ask that question, I will not make it long-winded. I will keep it to a minimum. I'll keep it short, and I will just use the question. When I do pose a question, I use it as a tool to just gently probe someone into talking more about themselves. I haven't listed this in this thing, but ethnography is also very close to like being your respondent's therapist, except that you don't owe them a recovery, but the practice of listening more than speaking and drawing judgment, that part is very important, and that is something you see in therapy as well, in psychology as well. Here are some buzzwords that you'll come across, whether you're in a classroom or if you're lucky in a professional sphere. If you come across these buzzwords, like, I think you've landed in a very sort of intellectually stimulating space. Reflexivity, intersubjectivity, flexibility, liminality, which is also basically like being on a threshold. Biopolitics, meaning making. Meaning making is the one thing that you should take away. If nothing else, if you don't remember anything else, ethnography is about making meaning of everything. How do we correlate this work in our day-long focused ethnographies or in our micro ethnographies specifically? It's easier to do meaning making over a long period of time. But if you're doing it over very short periods of time, where you've just got 4 or 5 days with someone, how do you make meaning? Here's a tip: you make time during the day to reflect on your conduct and your respondents' conduct and the engagement you have had with them. And I find that is the only way. So you have to figure out how much time you need to really feel satisfied with how much meaning you've made. You need to think about doing some post-event analysis. So if you spent 5-6 hours with your respondent during the day, then take an hour out to doodle, to do a little bit of journaling, to do a little bit of note making, to do some free association writing if you'd like to, and see what's coming out of you. These are excellent tools to take up in the field to just understand what's happening with you. So for example, if you're a woman and you're observing men and men who are of very patriarchal or patronizing belief, and if you come back feeling hostile or restless, even just restless, do a little bit of doodling, do a little bit of note making, do some free association writing, and think about how it's making you feel. And is it possible for you to take those feelings away and just look at them as, respondents? Maybe you will come across some realizations on your own, right? There's nothing definite. Nobody's telling you to, no, you absolutely have to separate your feelings from the feel. That's very hard, and I would definitely not advocate that. But doing these exercises are really important for an ethnographer, a good ethnographer. The upshot is that ethnography, when practiced within the limits of ethical considerations, consciously, sensitively, yields by way of comprehensive data, I mean, it yields things that are yields insights that are so comprehensive that quantitative or mixed methods data sometimes cannot. Right. So what I like to do, practically speaking, what I like to propose to my clients, what I like to propose to anybody who I'm engaging with on this, if I have to talk about a methodology, I like to suggest to people, do a little bit of ethnography first. Go in unstructured. Don't go in with any presuppositions of thesis or hypothesis or whatever it is. Go in and observe your community a little bit, your potential respondents a little bit. Get to know them, do a little bit of rapport building, and just try to understand some of the other things that are at play. And then come back and build any tools that you must. Yeah. So this is another thing. In times of COVID, we've been struggling to, obviously, everything that I said is predicated on being in the room with different people, being in the same space. And I don't think that a lot of us, a lot of people who are online are taking, they understand how hard it is, especially for a country like us, for cultures like us, to spend time away from social gatherings. The social gathering is a very important, for mental health purposes, is a very important thing. That is something that anthropology, sociology, and ethnography will tell you. So with that in the background, how do you continue to practice without, endangering somebody else's life in this instance? But how do you practice also when you can't travel for some reason? How do you continue to develop your practice? How do you develop a personal experience for yourself and for your respondent that you can then draw insights from? So, using ethnography, typically ethnography works really well in a practical space, other than, of course, for academic purposes, which I haven't listed here. Understanding the user, customer, donor, or beneficiary profile, understanding their trajectories, understanding what they've been through and what their behaviors, knowledge, attitude, practices are. Human-centered design makes very good use of ethnography, design ethnography. Anytime you want to understand unarticulated needs, ethnography is a good method to use, right? Anytime you want to conduct an in-depth investigation, ethnography is a good method to use. And all of this helps in knowledge and communication management, really, because like people keep saying, ethnography is about writing. So